Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer and trace one of the wildest trajectories in modern political history. We're going to look at a story that honestly reads like a Hollywood thriller, starting out on the rural dirt roads of the Deep South, plunging into the highly classified world of nuclear submarines, and ultimately landing right in the Oval Office.
Seriously, think about this for a second. How exactly does a humble peanut farmer manage to pull off the ultimate political hero's journey? When he first announced his candidacy, his national name recognition was so incredibly low that his rivals literally asked, "Jimmy who?" And yet, he outmaneuvered the entire political establishment. So how'd he do it? Let's figure it out.
To wrap our heads around this ascent, we're going to break it down into 5 key phases: his roots in the Navy, the return to the farm, stepping into the Georgia political arena, his time as a New South governor, and finally, that legendary Jimmy Who campaign.
All right, Phase 1, Roots and the Navy, from Plains, Georgia to nuclear submarines. Picture this. Carter grows up in the tiny, rural community of Archery, Georgia. But he's got this massive, lifelong dream of attending the United States Naval Academy. And you know what? He actually pulls it off. He graduates in 1946, does tours on diesel subs in both the Atlantic and Pacific fleets, and by 1952, his sharp technical skills catch the eye of the legendary Captain Hyman G. Rickover. Rickover was famously demanding, but he brings Carter into the Navy's brand new nuclear submarine program. Carter would later say this grueling tutelage was one of the most profound influences on his entire life.
Now, I want you to focus on the number 90. Here's why. In December of '52, there's a partial meltdown at an experimental nuclear reactor up in Chalk River, Canada. Carter actually leads the U.S. maintenance crew to shut it down. The radiation levels were so extreme that his team had to be lowered, one by one, into the crippled core for exactly 90 seconds at a time to disassemble it. No more, no less, it was incredibly high stakes.
So why does this matter for a future president? Well, those intense 90 seconds profoundly and permanently impacted how he viewed atomic energy. Decades later, that exact terrifying experience directly shaped his presidential decision to halt the development of the neutron bomb. Talk about a full circle moment.
Moving right along to Phase 2, return to the farm, which felt like a monumental step backward. Right as Carter is gearing up to serve on the second U.S. nuclear sub, tragedy strikes. His father passes away from pancreatic cancer in 1953, and everything changes.
He asks for a release from active duty to go back and save the family peanut business. Just imagine the whiplash here. He goes from being a globe-trotting nuclear submarine officer to living in public housing in Plains, Georgia, desperately fighting a brutal drought on a dirt farm. His wife, Rosalind, literally called this abrupt transition a monumental step backward.
But here's the thing. They tackled this hardship with the exact same discipline he learned in the Navy. That first year, they barely broke even, but they just kept grinding. Jimmy takes agriculture classes, Rosalind learns accounting so she can manage the books, they strategically open lines of credit, and over time, they completely transform that struggling plot of land into a thriving, highly successful enterprise. That sheer grit and resilience, yeah, that's going to become a major hallmark of his political style. Which brings us to Phase 3, the Georgia political arena and the emergence of the calculated politician. Following the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown v. Board of Education, the South is a powder keg of racial tension. Carter, who actually favored integration, realizes something crucial. If he really wants to make a difference, he has to jump into the messy, complicated world of state politics.
And man, his early roadmap was definitely rocky. He wins a state Senate seat in '62, but his first run for governor in 1966 ends in a crushing defeat to a staunch segregationist named Lester Maddox. That loss hit Carter hard. I mean, it forced him to completely tear down and rebuild his entire campaign strategy from scratch for the next election.
This is where the 1970 campaign really shows us a remarkably calculated politician willing to neutrally play both sides of a deeply divided state to secure a win. To beat his liberal primary opponent, Carl Sanders, Carter plays a wild dual-track strategy. On one hand, he's actively courting black leaders like Martin Luther King Sr. But on the other, he's making appeals to white conservatives by actually praising George Wallace, a prominent segregationist. It was pure, calculated electoral math designed to guarantee a victory.
And it worked perfectly. Which leads us to Phase 4, a new South governor and the big pivot. Because the absolute second he secures the governorship, he engineers a dramatic shift that completely blindsides the conservative base that had just voted for him.
January 12, 1971.
Inauguration Day. He steps up to the mic and drops this single sentence: "The time for racial discrimination is over." The crowd was absolutely stunned. By stating that so flatly, he alienated the segregationists instantly. But in that same breath, he cemented his national legacy as a progressive, New South governor.
Once in office, he applies that Navy engineer mindset to everything he touches. He takes a wrecking ball to the bureaucracy, famously consolidating 300 sprawling state agencies down to just 22. He pushed hard on civil rights, too, hiring black state employees and hanging portraits of prominent black Georgians in the state capitol, which, by the way, totally infuriated the KKK. It's also worth noting that he signed a revised death penalty statute after the Supreme Court struck down an older version, though he did express deep regret over that decision later in life.
Now, Georgia law dictated he couldn't run for a second consecutive term. So we arrive at our final phase, the Jimmy Who campaign. An outsider steps up for a post-Watergate America. The whole country was reeling from political scandals, totally distrustful of Washington, and desperate for an honest outsider. Carter saw his opening.
When he announces his run in late 1974, he's going up against heavyweights, and the establishment basically just laughed at him. But he countered all those Jimmy Who taunts with one simple, unwavering introduction that he delivered straight to voters thousands of times. "My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president."
And his hustle? It was borderline insane. Just think about these numbers: 50,000 miles traveled, 37 states visited, over 200 speeches given. And this was all before most of his rivals even officially entered the race. He strategically swept the South, then totally blindsided rural voters in the North. He rocketed from total obscurity to frontrunner before the establishment even knew what hit them.
But his meticulously crafted outsider image almost derailed right at the finish line. Just weeks before the election, he gives this incredibly candid interview to Playboy magazine where he talks about his religious views on pride and admits he's committed adultery in his heart many times. The media went absolutely wild. It caused a massive feeding frenzy that completely vaporized his commanding lead over incumbent Gerald Ford down to almost nothing.
Yet, despite all the media chaos and the razor-thin polls, he pulls it off. 297 electoral votes to Ford's 240. So, what was the ultimate deciding factor? It was his overwhelming support from black voters. In incredibly tight states like Ohio and Wisconsin, that demographic was the absolute key that pushed him over the edge and successfully completed his ascent to the presidency.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, and honestly, leaves us with a lot to chew on. We've seen the relentless work ethic, the incredibly calculated state-level strategies, and the perfect post-Watergate timing. It really leaves you wondering, was this political hero's journey just a fluke? A completely unique product of the 1970s? Or is this a masterclass strategy just waiting for the next obscure outsider to put in the miles today? Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.